Hey everybody, how's it going? So in the previous video we looked at the new feature of Angular 4, which was the if, then and else feature, where we were able to use ng template inside of our Angular components and toggle which template would be shown based on whether we suffice the if then expression or the else expression. In that video I mentioned I was going to move on to routing. So that's what we're going to be doing here today. We're going to be moving on to routing, and I know I've covered routing a fair bit in my previous videos, but I just want to go back over a few little basics because we haven't really focused on it directly. We've kind of been doing it in passing. So what I'm going to do is I've created a new complete project, and basically it's just loaded here. There's nothing different. This is straight up Angular 4 application done by the Angular Satellite. I've changed no code at this point. So the first thing I want to show is something inside of the index.html. And the thing I want to show inside the index.html is this base element. Now, what does this base element do for our Angular apps? Well, basically what it does is it defines the URL that specifies the root for this application. Now, you might have a situation where your Angular app has to sit alongside of some other existing application, such as a CMS or some kind of server-side application, where you have a specific URL reserved for your this application, this bar application. So this href will normally have to match the same URL that you've been reserved. So for the purpose of all the tutorials that we've been doing, I've just left it at root, okay? But as we see, when I create the features, which I'm going to create 3 features in this particular lesson, I'm going to wire them up via routes, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and I'm going to change this base href and show you what it actually does. And then once I've done that, I'm going to go through a few things such as basically how the routes work at a very fundamental level, how we can create links to routes, how we can determine the link that's currently active for a route, which I've covered some of these things in the past, but I've been covering them in ways that are a little bit different to what I'll be covering in this video. And the other thing we'll look at is the router service and also the location service and what the differences are between those two things. So let's get started. I'm going to come over to my little terminal here, and I'm currently inside my routing examples. I'm going to create 3 components. So the first one I'm going to create is a component called home. Okay, so this will essentially give us like a home screen, something of that nature. And then the next one I'm going to create is I'm going to create a child component. So this will be like a child URL of some sort. And then I'll create another one called child2. Alright. Now lastly, I will create a not found component, but I'm going to shuffle around this not found because I don't want it to be in a feature folder. In fact, I'm not going to do it this way. I'm just going to add it manually myself. So I'm going to come over to the code now, and you can see inside of this app folder we've got the 3 new features as well as app component. Now quickly I want to add in the not found component. I'm going to do that very quickly, and we need a HTML file for this as well. Not found .component.html, and I'm pretty much going to copy the not found component from app component, so it's going to look very similar to this, and just paste and change a few things. So this would be app-not-found, and this is the not-found. There's not going to be any CSS associated with this component, though normally it would be. And I'm going to rename this as the not found component. And there's not going to be any content inside of here. So we'll save that. we're going to come into the not found component here. I'm just going to put a H1 that says not found. Your page could not be found. Something basic like that. And then I come down to the module and just make sure that we include it here. Okay, so up there the app component is, oops, I'm just going to copy this and we'll go not dash found component and change this to not found, and lastly we'll include it as a declaration. Okay, so now that's in play. The next thing I want to do is I'm going to update all the markup for all of these things before we look at the route part. Okay, so I'm going to come into home and I'm going to create a home HTML here. I'm just going to put another heading up here. Whoops, H1. Now I'm just going to type home, and then I might type in a paragraph, this is the home page or something. Is the home page. And I'm pretty much going to do very similar stuff for the other two. This is the child 2 page. Put child 2, and for child it'll be very similar to this. Right. Child, and then once I do that, I need to update the home one as well. I'm going to just quickly jump into the template, and I'm going to remove some stuff here I don't want, such as all the on init stuff. We don't need anything inside these components, so let's clean it up a bit. Remove the on init, and I'm also going to remove the style sheet because I won't be using it, and we'll remove the style sheet from the feature as well. Oops, I'm not sure why I selected there, so I was going to delete it. So we'll move that. We'll move the test file for now. Just delete that as well, just to make things a little easier to navigate. For child 2, we're going to do the same thing, just delete the file. And the tests come in and remove the CSS. Remove everything here, just at the thing like that. Remove that, and remove the on it. So child 1, child 2, and then for home, we're not going to need CSS either. We'll delete that, and we're definitely not going to need the test file. So we'll delete that. Come to the home component, same deal. Just remove all this stuff. So all this. I like to keep things nice and clean, guys. That's how I work. So we've got 3 features where we just need the bare minimum, and we'll remove these as well. So delete, remove the trash. Now I'm not going to remove the CSS for the app component because I'm going to add some CSS in there because I think it'll be interesting. Now I think at this point we can check to make sure that all our components can be loaded here. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to go app home, because that should be the home component, and then underneath that we'll have the app child. I'm pretty sure that's what the name will be, and then app child probably 2, and I can check these in the component, but I'm pretty sure they're the 3. And we'll just quickly check to see if they will display, and they do. Okay, and then lastly, we'll just make sure that the app not found is also coming up. So there are our 4 pages that we're going to have for our routes. You can see that they all display some form of information. Now, just to be perfect, whoops, I'm going to remove the heading from the top here. I'm going to come to the component and I'm going to remove the title because we don't need it for this particular example. So by rights, we've got our 4 sections. Now, we've seen in the past how we can kind of set these up, but I want to go through it again because I've kind of just rushed through it a lot in a lot of videos and I haven't explained them thoroughly. So, in Angular, we have this thing called a route, okay? And a route is essentially some little object that keeps an eye of certain paths that we put in our browser here, or if we click a certain URL or link, it'll wrap a certain URL to a particular component in our Angular 2 app. So we can set up a route that has a certain URL that points to the child component, or we can set a route up that has a URL that points to the child 2 component, and so on and so on and so on, okay? And so basically that's the main part to how routes work in Angular 2, is that you'll have some component that you want to load via some form of URL, and you basically set up this route to map the URL to the component. So how do we do this? Well, basically routing in Angular is done through a module called the router module, okay? And this needs to be loaded in your app module. Now you can see by default up here, we've got browser module, ng module, forms module for forms. We've got the HTTP module for making HTTP requests, which we won't be doing in this video. So I plan to change this one to the router module. So the router module sits inside of the current path, which is @angular/router. Okay, so we now can import this thing called a router module, and we could just type in here router module like so. However, what Angular 2 wants you to do is not only does it want a router module, but it wants you to configure ahead of time what the type of route you want to exist. Now the router module allows you to call a method on it that allows you to assign routes, and then ultimately it returns a router module with some routes in it. Okay? And the way that we do this from a high level, without going too deep into features and modules at the moment, is we have a method on the router module called forRoot. Okay? And what this method is it says from the root of the application, so from this, base URL path, right? So from this point here, what I type as any path inside of each route that we're going to define inside of this array will be relative to the base URL, okay? Might make more sense when I type it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start creating some routes. So normally you have them on a separate line like this. And I'll explain more on the types of routes that you can create in this part in another video. But for this video, I'm just going to show the minimum required to create a route in Angular 4/2, whatever it is, Angular. So what you normally do is you create an object like so that will identify a route. For each route, you need to specify a property called the path. Right? And this is an absolute must. You must have a path that you're going to use to specify a particular route. It's the only required field to my understanding, and that's all we're going to be using here. So, for the ones we've got so far, I'm going to set the one up for child 2 first. Because to me, that's the most specific route out there. So normally what you do with routes is they go in a particular order from the most specific route to the most generic. Okay, so to me, child 2 or child or even home are 3 of the most specific routes there at the moment. So if I want to load the view for the child 2 component what is the path that I want to specify in my URL to get to the contents of that component. And I'm just going to call it child-2. Okay. Now, for the purpose of this video, I'm just going to link this path to an individual component, but there are other properties you can call at this point, such as maybe redirects and a few other little bits like calling children and all this other stuff to specify more routes. But I'm going to keep it simple, and I'm just going to point this path to an individual component at the moment, which I'm going to pull down the child2 component. Okay, so that's one route. Okay, so if I was to let everything go right now, if we got child-2, you would get to here. If I picked anything else, well, because we have no other URLs, it would actually just drop out, and because there are no other routes, it will probably come to child2 anyway. Okay, in fact, we'll test this out because I'm not 100% sure on this. So we'll save, we'll come over, and I just realized that I need to include one more thing for this to work, which I'll get to in a moment. Let's finish with the routes. Or hang on, no, let's not finish with the routes. Let's actually put in the thing that's required for the routes to actually be utilized in Angular 2. And that is something called a router applet. So inside your Bootstrap component, so this app component, which is our Bootstrap component, the HTML template that we use for this, we must specify something called a router outlet. Okay, and it must be spelled like this. And for now, that's all I'm going to include in here. I'm going to remove all the other components and just specify this. So if you don't have this, routes will not work. You must specify one of these elements somewhere within your application so that any component that is being accessed via a route can load where this placeholder is. So you can put things before and after this, and it will always be included because this is the Bootstrap component. So this is kind of like your layout component, and then anything you load from a route will fit inside of these little elements here. So let's quickly check this. As we can see so far, nothing has come up. So it seems to me that unless I put in myself the actual name of the child to, it won't come up. So you see how I typed in child2, right? So if I come back over to the module, I put child-2 and it mapped to child2 component. And we know it's the child2 component because we have the heading child2 and a paragraph that says this is the child2 page. If I go just child, nothing happens. We don't get anything. We just get blank. Okay? So we need to set up more routes, okay, to finish this off. So we'll move on to the next one. And this one will be the child route. So we've got one for child2. Now we just need one for child. So this is pretty straightforward. We just go child, and we remove the child2 bit. We just have child component, and we save. Alright, so far we've got two specific routes that lead to two separate components which have different views. So I'll refresh this again. Again, we haven't got anything for the default. I come in, I go child2 again. Well, we still have child2. If I now just change this to child and run, now we've got the child component. Okay, so that's pretty cool. So we've loaded two components through two different route mechanisms. So let's keep moving on. Next one we're going to try and get is the home. Right, so next one is to do another one. We'll just call it home, and it's basically going to be the home component. Now, hopefully you're starting to get the idea now for these, at least these three, what we're doing here. So come back over, we'll refresh. We're still on the child URL, find our type home, and press enter. We get the home one, right? If I go back to the root, we still get nothing. Okay? Now, we don't want to have nothing for the root. For the situations where we've got nothing, we really want to go to the home component, right? Makes sense, doesn't it? If we've got no route or no path, we want to make sure we show the home screen. So how do we do this? The answer is pretty easy. We create another object, we have another path. This time it's empty, okay? Empty means no path at all. So we come in, we go component, and I'm going to load the home component. Alright. Hopefully this makes some sense. We come over and refresh. We have absolutely no path here, or a slash will also cover the same thing. And we've got the home component showing. So far so good. We've covered all our feature URLs. We've covered the default path. But the one thing we haven't captured is this situation. If I go /login, for example, we just get a blank screen. Now, that's not really good. We really generally want to show a not found, right? And that's why we have that not found component in there for situations where one of the routes don't match one of these, right? So how do we specify a path that catches all the rest of the URLs that aren't listed here? Well, Angular does it by creating its own path with 2 stars, right? And this is basically a wildcard path. So we're saying for this path, which is wildcard, so in other words, catch everything, right? We're going to load the component not found, okay? And we need to add a comma here and save. And if we refresh and we go to /login, now we get a not found screen, okay? So we've been able to successfully now do some basic routes, and if I change this to anything, we're getting not found. Now, the one detail I want to quickly bring up here is that you must make sure when you're specifying these routes, you start with the most specific route first and the most generic, i.e. the wildcard one, last. Because if you don't, watch what happens. Okay, if I take the wildcard, right, and I put it to the top, where I'm saying now match everything. Alright, so match everything, including these down here. What do you think is going to happen? I refresh. So far we're on not found. If I go /child-2, which showed the child 2 page before, now it shows not found. But that's not correct. If I go and say child, it still says not found. That's also not correct. If I come in and go /home, it's still not found. That's not correct either. Alright? So every single route at this point is being routed to the not found component. So that's not correct. So that's why it's important that the order in which you specify these routes actually matter. So I'm going to put the wildcard one back to the bottom here and save once again and just make sure that we get the home, which we do. Okay? So I'm going to talk more about the router modules and how we can set up these kinds of routes in a future video. But what I want to move on to now is how to get links for these things and how to link from one component to the other, and basically toggle between the different components. Now to do this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a top bar navigation just up here. And we'll basically have home, child 1, child 2, and then probably some random link that goes to a not found page. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to quickly add some CSS in this. So the first thing I want to do is I want to come to the styles section. And I'm just going to update the font a little bit. So I'm going to go font, we'll go font, family, we'll go Verdana. Okay. Just something different than Times New Roman. It's kind of a bit boring. Now for the rest of it, I'm going to add CSS to the app component. And what we're going to add is a fair bit here. So what I want to do first is we're going to have a nav element at some point. And this nav element is going to have a margin of 5 pixels and auto. So it's going to be tried to be centralized, but not. I don't think it's going to end up being centralized in the end. We're going to have background of, let's say, #121. So a very dark blackish color with a little tinge of green. And we'll give it a padding of 4 pixels. Okay. So let's quickly add. Oh no, we'll do the rest of the CSS for the nav bar. So the next thing we have is a UL. So you should all know how to set up a basic navigation bar, I hope, in HTML. So that's all I'm doing here. I'm just adding some style sheets. So I'm going to give no padding to the UL. I'm going to make the UL display of inline block. And we'll give it a margin of 0 as well. And then inside of, and that should be nav UL. And nav li, not nab, nav li will have display of inline, because I'm not going to really resize the LIs. Padding right of 8 pixels, we'll say. What else? Let's give it a little border to the right so we can see a separation. 3 pixel. No, we'll go 3 pixel solid, and we'll go very light greyish color like that. Sounds good to me. And then for the anchor tags themselves, so we've got a link, a visited, a active, and a, what's the other one? Always forget, hover. Should know the hover one of all of them. And for these ones, we'll change the color to white. We'll set the text decoration to none, so that will remove the underline. What else? We'll go display of also inline block. We may not set any width on this, and I'm just going to reduce the font size a little bit to 0.8 EMs. And lastly, I'm going to add an active class to the currently selected route link. We're going to add, using a certain attribute, the ability to have a class on the anchor that will match the route in the URL. So we're going to go a.active, and for this, I'm just going to set the font weight to bold so we can see a little bit better, and we'll make sure that the text decoration is in fact underlined, so we can see that once again that we know which one's active. And I think we'll start there for the moment. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to come over to the app component HTML, and above the router outlet, remembering that this is a layout component, I'm going to start the nav. Okay, so we're going to nav, and we're going to add that UL, and then LI, and we're going to have 4 LIs, like so. And to start off with, before we do any Angular stuff, I'll just go we'll go home/A, and then I'll quickly add the other 4 in. So A, let's go child, let's go child 2, and lucky last we'll say nothing. Okay, So let's see what we get here when we come back over to the code. So we got a little black navigation bar here. We can't click on any of the links at the moment because we're not linking to anything. And as we can see, we can change the route to something else. So we'll say child, and the child page will come up. But as you can see, the navigation still doesn't toggle which one's active yet. So we need to do that now. Now I showed this earlier on in the course, but I showed it one way that probably wasn't the best way to do it at the time, right? In terms of toggling the active class. So what I need to do first is I need to specify something called a router link. So if you don't remember what that is, essentially this is what Angular uses to look at the URL that's specified on your link and try to map it to a specific route object. So whatever you type in here with a slash, whatever's after the slash is what the Angular app's going to look at for, do we have a route that matches the path after this slash? If we do, we're going to look at the component we need to load, and we're going to load that component in replace of the current component we've loaded. Okay? You'll get a better understanding in a minute once I do it. So for this one, I'm just going to leave it as slash like that. Okay? Because we know for a fact on the root of the application, we get the home page. Okay? And this, at this stage, is the root. Why is this the root? Well, it just is. Okay? This basically means relative root. The other thing we need to do, and which I will look at now, is how to specify the active class for this. So there's another attribute you can create on an anchor tag, which I did not mention in a previous video. It's called router link active. Okay, and basically what this does is it allows you to specify the class that you want your A tag to have when the URL or the route URL that's in the address bar matches this specific link. So, for example, if we're on the root screen here, which we are at the moment, this link here will basically hover up, become active now because the URL here matches the URL up here. And in fact, I can show you that right now by saving this. So if I save and I come over, you'll see now the home element has an underline on it. If I come to /child, well, in fact, there's an issue that I need to explain in a minute, and I probably should have waited, but it's going to keep doing this for all routes because it's at the highest level of slash. So I'll explain the issue that happened there in a minute. But we'll move on for the moment. And now we'll go /child. Alright. And then we'll come to the next one. We'll go /child-2. And then lastly, for the last one, we can put nothing. Okay? This is literally nothing that matches this. So we'll save, come back over, and we still have home highlighted, but now we can click on the other sets of these links. Now when I click on this link, it takes us to the child's URL. The child component is loaded, alright, because it's acknowledged that the router link for child matches the path that is in the route. And then, as a result, it's able to look up the component, which is the child component. Now, you also probably noticed up here that both home and child are both highlighted, and we'll get to the point of why home is highlighted in a minute. If I click on child 2, you'll see that child is no longer selected here. Child 2 is now selected, and the child 2 URL is selected here. The child 2 component is loaded here. And if I click nothing, well, the nothing URL is highlighted, but not found is highlighted, okay? And in fact, this will only link up when it says nothing up here. So if I change it to nothing 2, it's not going to highlight anymore, even though it's not found. It's just something to pay attention to. So you can click through and everything's all good. Okay, except this home link. So what's happened with this home link? Well, what Angular does by default is it uses like a path expression to match what should be active or not. So for example, a slash suffices all of these here because the slash is in all of them, right? So when the URL gets loaded, it says, oh yeah, this router link matches this path, so we're going to keep it highlighted at all times. So what you can do to counteract this and to ensure that this is active only when we are explicitly on a slash or we're on a default screen, right? You need to add another attribute here. And that attribute is something that's called router link active options. And this has to be set to an object, which some people pass it like this, others pass it from their component themselves. I'm, for shorthand and for the purpose of this video, I'm going to specify here. And you just have an object that has an exact property and you set it to true. So this now says only set this as active, right, when the route in the URL fully matches that slash. If it goes /child, that's not a full match. Okay? So hopefully that will now address the home always being highlighted problem. Okay? So currently we're on the home screen. If I click child now, you'll see that the home one is no longer highlighted. Okay? Cool. So that's linking to components. Now just quickly understand that what you type in here has to match the route that is inside the module here. Alright, so it has to be exactly the same as this path, otherwise it will not work. Okay? So that's setting up navigation with router links and setting active states on it, and then handling situations where things need to be matched exactly. We've spoken about the router outlet and how that works. It's basically a placeholder for where the components go based on the route. Okay? And the other thing that we've looked at very briefly, and in fact I'm going to change now just to prove a point, is the base href. So at the moment, everything points to just slash. So when I come in here, you know, slash is the home of the application. Just say though, we will reserve this URL on our main application. So say the Angular app is just part of a big CMS. We can come in here and just say, they could say, you know what, this is the URL we're giving you for your Angular app, so you have to use this, alright? So if your Angular application is using routing, you need to ensure that this is currently set to what they say. So you come in, you just save that, and what's going to happen now is that when we go to the root, it's going to redirect to that base URL, which is virtual directory. Okay. Now after that, I can go child, and it's still going to map to child. Okay. It's still all going to work the same. So then I'm going to click on this. You'll see that child 2 is shown after virtual directory. Okay. So that's all cool. So we're getting through most of the basics here. The last thing I want to show for this video is what we call the router service and the location service. Okay? And how they fit into the equation. So what we're going to do is we're going to close all these to start off with, because we're getting way too many tabs here. And we don't need all these open. The only one I need open is this app component.ts. So I'm going to do a couple of things in here. One thing I'm going to do on init, and one thing I'm going to do on do check. Okay, so I'm going to implement both of these on init and I spelled the implements wrong, and we're also going to implement do check. Okay. Now we'll just quickly add in the ng on in it, and the ng do check, and we'll leave them alone for the moment. So what I mentioned a second ago is I want to look at quickly the location service and the router service and what they can do for us. Okay, and I'm going to spend a little bit more time talking about these in more depth in another video, but I just want to quickly give you an idea of how they work. So firstly, we need to import them. So for the location service, it's inside of this particular package, so Angular/common. And for the router service, well, it's inside of the, you probably would have guessed it, Angular/router package. Okay. So in the constructor, and I'm going to create a constructor here, I'm going to include both of these, so location, and we're going to specify as a location, and then for the router, we're going to have private, and we're going to have router, which is a type of router, and we just need to close that off. Oops. I want that to be on one line, just like that. I'm a little picky with my constructors. If I can keep them to one line, great. So now we have this location and we have this router service. So what do these two do? Well, just to start, the location service is more looking at the browser address bar and basically where that's at. And it allows you to get access to go back. So it's kind of, think of it as the location object inside of JavaScript. It provides basically a wrapper around that for your code to work in your Angular components. So for the purpose of this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show what it reveals as the URL when we first load the page. Okay. So if I come in and I go this dot location URL equals location dot path. No, I think it's this dot location dot path, like so. And I'll just quickly set up some variables. So location URL equals blank, and we'll set up another one called router URL equals blank. So when we first load the page, we can load in this .location.path as the location URL. Now I can do the same for the router. However, with routing, it really doesn't kick in until the router module has been loaded. So there's really 0 point on worrying about it at the initialization of the component. Though you can, and it will have the right information. However, when the route changes in the component that's part of the router applet, because remember that all the components are loaded inside of here, so they're created and destroyed and created and destroyed every time we change a route. And that's the other thing I probably didn't mention very quickly, is when I click on home, right, that's creating a new instance of the home component. And when I click away, so if I go to child, the home component is destroyed completely. So it's like an ngIf. As soon as you navigate away, the previous component is destroyed and the new component is initialized. When I go back, then the child one in this case was destroyed and the home one's created, right? So there's really no point concerning ourselves when the app component loads about routing, because routing is going to happen every time there's a change. And the change will be that we've clicked on a link somewhere, so a do check will fire as a result of this and not an init of the app component, because the app component has already loaded. Alright, so we have to do it at the do check level. to see the changes to the route. Okay, whereas location, it only really focuses on what's in the address bar from the minute it loads. Okay, that is it. That's all it cares about. So that's why I can put it inside of ng on init here. So we go this dot router URL equals this dot router dot URL. And now inside of the app component, underneath the place where we're going to have the components load in, I'm just going to add a footer. And inside this footer, I'm going to have 2 paragraphs, like so. Right. And the first paragraph is going to have something called like URL path accessed by the location service is, and I can't remember what I named the variable. I'll come back in a second. And the second one will be something very similar. URL path accessed by the router service is blah. Okay, so we'll quickly jump over location URL and router URL. Let's change this to router URL. Cool. So if you don't remember what these are, this one's for the address bar when we first load the page. This one is for whenever we change the route while the application is running. So when we click a different router link, it will essentially change the URL that gets loaded here because we're doing it on a do check. Because even when we click on a link, that fires off a do check in your component. So in a situation such as that, I'm just putting in a handler to say, yeah, let's update the router URL because the route had changed. Okay, that's all I'm doing here. But I just wanted to show you the differences between the two. So let's take a look now. And we've got an issue. Well, looks of it. And what's the issue? Unexpected closing tag P. It may happen when the tag has already been closed by another tag. Looks like I didn't close a P tag somewhere. P. Silly me. Cool. So you can see the URL path accessed by location service is blank, essentially because there's nothing after the root. If I type in child here, you'll see it's /child for both. Right? If I click on child 2 instead of typing it up here, you'll see the original location service is using child and this is using child 2. In fact, I might be a little bit wrong here. I have a feeling that it might be different if I do this. Let me try this for a second. I'm not perfect, I make mistakes. So if I click on child, there you go. It actually works for both, right? However, for the home, it looks to me like it doesn't show anything if it's the root. Now the difference between the router service and the location service is this one literally works with the address and the location object. This one works with your routes that are loaded from the router module. Okay, so with the router service you can actually do more with your routes. You can manage your routes, you can remove routes, you can do all that kind of stuff. Whereas the location one, you really are struck down by the address bar only. But in the case of this, they pretty much load the same information, except for when we're on the root directory here. Now I'm just going to pretty up this footer a little bit, just to make it a little easier to read. So I'm going to just try this for a second as well. So on load, because I'm going to comment this out for a sec. I think even I've tripped myself up here, and I'm going to remove the do check as a requirement and just put in parentheses here, come back over, And I'll go child. And see, that's the difference as well. This child is loaded based on the fact it's in the URL, but the router service won't do anything about it until you actually click on something. And the reason why that's not firing is because we're not doing it on the do check anymore. So I think that was the difference, sorry. So this will always be correct based on what's in the URL. The router service will only be correct when you actually make changes and you catch it in real time using do check. That was the difference. But we don't need ng on init for this. We can actually change the location URL each time anyway. So let's just add this code back, like so, and we'll get rid of the on init this time. So let's do check and remove on init. Cool. So now if I start clicking around, you'll see they load the same thing. Alright. If I come to /nothing and then I just load it, they are /nothing here. So it must be just for the home page. Interesting. Anyway, basically the difference between the two is this has access to the routes that you define. This just does access to the address bar. Okay, that's the difference. I thought they were slightly different here. I guess they aren't. But anyway, bad example gone wrong. But it's good to know that there's two different types there anyway. Okay. So last thing I'll just do here, just to be perfect in my example, is I'm just going to add some CSS here just to make it look a little cleaner. In fact, you know what? I don't need to do that. It's part of the GitHub repository anyway. But I think you guys will understand at least most of my points here. And in the next video, we're going to look more into how to define the routes in the module here, the different things we can do. We're going to look at for child once again over for root. We're going to look at the other properties that you can define on an individual route. Like for example, this one here, instead of using component, we could have used a redirect to, right, and go on home. Like so. So if I do this, and I come over, and that may not have worked the way I intended it. Because I've got to put in the path match. So on a redirect to, I have to put in path match equals, I think it's full path. Full. Can't remember off the top of my head. I think it's full. Yeah. So if I come in here now and do that, it's always going to redirect to home, right? Even if I try to blank it, it's going to redirect to home. So there's going to be little things like that that we'll talk about next. And then once again, if you guys don't remember, I'm going to talk about how to break this up so that your URLs are part of your features instead of part of a main router module set of routes like this. This is not actually good practice. Don't know if you guys can remember how to do that, but I'll probably cover it anyway. But yes, definitely we'll look more into these routes individually, especially things like this. There's also one for prefix as well. So we'll cover that next video. Until then, I'll see you all later.